July 1944, Camp Bowie, Texas. The mess hall thermometer reads 110 degrees as German prisoners shuffle forward, expecting thin soup and scorn. Instead, a U.S. Army cook slides a metal bowl of vanilla ice cream across the counter, cold vapor curling in the heat. Another GI spoons gravy over roast beef, adds white bread and butter, then points toward coffee. Laughter bursts in the line, half disbelief, half relief, because propaganda had promised brutality, not dessert. American policy made the moment possible. Under the 1929 Geneva Convention, prisoner rations had to equal those of the detaining powers' depot troops, and the United States enforced that standard. Quartermaster schedules and Provost Marshal General files directed ample calories, refrigeration, and canteen stock to the Texas camp network. Even the weather cooperated with the story that July saw punishing strings of triple-digit days across North Texas. The ice cream was more than kindness. It was strategy. Declassified guidance framed humane treatment as psychological warfare, undercutting Nazi indoctrination by confronting captives with abundance, legality, and discipline. Many would write home that conditions in America eclipsed rations available to families in Germany. Guards noted immediate changes. Tempers cooled, work details ran smoother, escape talk faded. A few men, stunned, asked whether such food was a trick. What collapsed that afternoon were certainties. The enemy they had been told to hate fed them like soldiers, showed movies, sold Coca-Cola in camp canteens, and insisted on rules. One scoop of sweetness in murderous heat made an argument no pamphlet could match. Democracy's strength was logistical, lawful, and confident enough to be generous. How did the Army build a system capable of serving mercy cold in the Texas summer, and why did it matter far beyond the wire? The answer begins in files, timetables, factories, and fields across America. In 1943, the German Army still regarded capture by the Allies as a fate worse than death. Wehrmacht indoctrination films, archived at the Bundesarchiv, BAB Film K1133, warned that prisoners would be starved or mutilated. Pamphlets distributed through Afrika Korps units in Tunisia claimed Anglo-Americans torture captives. Mercy is Bolshevik weakness. Field reports from OKW Abteilung Kuda II, March 1943, recorded that men preferred dying in battle to falling into American hands. That conviction stemmed from hard-fought triumphs. At Kasserine Pass, February 1943, General Erwin Rommel's staff believed their superiority permanent. Captured Allied documents showed poor coordination, reinforcing German confidence. In the Afrika Korps War Diary, Bundesarchiv RH 27, 7-66, an entry reads, "American supply columns are clumsy and soft targets." Even as defeat loomed, officers still promised that captivity meant starvation. When transports of Afrika Korps men reached U.S. ports that summer, their expectations hardened into defiance. At Camp Hearn's intake interview, Provost Marshal General Report to 63C, Nov. 1943, a POW insisted, "We are soldiers of a superior culture. Americans are children with machines." Many refused to work, forming self-styled National Socialist committees that enforced ideological discipline inside the barbed wire. Commanders warned guards that open brutality could validate Nazi myths, so restraint became doctrine. According to historian Arnold Kramer in Nazi Prisoners of War in America, 1979, initial camp intelligence noted prisoners' astonishment at the sheer scale of American logistics. Rows of refrigerated trucks, mechanical kitchens, organized leisure. Yet pride endured. Letters intercepted by Army censors, RG 389, Box 1274, boasted, "We will outlast their softness." Meanwhile, U.S. domestic records reveal the irony. While German civilians back home survived on 1,500 calories daily, American regulations authorized 3,900 for POWs, the identical ration issued to depot troops. Even so, most German soldiers believed this a temporary gesture or propaganda stunt. confidence lingered like uniform creases in the Texas sun. Inside the wire, they sang patriotic songs and dreamed of reprisal. Outside, farmers watched them with curiosity rather than hatred. Two worlds stood staring across barbed fences, one built on ideology, the other on industry. That collision of belief and reality would soon be decided not by weapons, but by rations, refrigeration, and rules. For when the merchants they mocked began serving ice cream in Texas, German certainties melted faster than their pride. When the first German prisoners arrived on American soil in April 1943, the United States was still improvising its role as a global jailer. Provost Marshal General Archer Lurch's internal memo of April 12th, Record Group 389, admitted, facilities inadequate, personnel untrained, interpreters lacking. The War Department faced shortages of guards, lumber and barbed wire, while ship convoys from North Africa kept delivering more captured men, nearly 150,000 by summer's end. Public anxiety mirrored logistical strain. Newspapers headlined the paradox: Nazis fed while Americans rationed sugar. In May 1943, the New York Times criticized what it called lavish treatment of enemies. Across Texas, civic groups protested planned camps near Brownwood and Hearne, warning of escapes and moral insult to families with sons overseas. Yet within the Army Service Forces, planners viewed humane management as essential national demonstration. Quartermaster Corps tables, verified in QMC Circular No. 47, September 1943, allocated 3,900 calories per day to every POW, precisely the ration for depot troops. Rail schedules moved flour, meat, coffee, and dairy south from depots at Fort Worth and Houston, while new mobile refrigeration units, Technical Bulletin 5520, ensured perishable supplies even in 110-degree heat. Financially, America outspent all other belligerents on prisoner care. By war's end, the program had cost over $1 billion on 1940s currency, yet camp records show minimal riot or disease. To policymakers, this was investment in post-war credibility, proved democracy's discipline, and the propaganda war would follow. Still, in 1943, the operation looked fragile. The Army resorted to camp companies of older reservists and WWII clerks to staff posts. Training manuals were written on the fly. Even the moral dimension was uncertain. Many Americans saw generosity as weakness, but within that perceived softness lay strategy. Internal War Department Memoranda, DEC 1943, explicitly defined POW treatment as a laboratory for democratic persuasion. If Nazis could be broken by comfort and order rather than whips, the United States would win twice, on battlefields and in belief. The camps of Texas were to be its proof. Behind their guard towers rose mess halls, libraries, and ice plants, monuments to the idea that a nation secure in its power could afford mercy. By late 1943, Washington had turned prisoner management into a deliberate instrument of persuasion. Declassified memoranda from the Provost Marshal General's Office, RG 389, File POW Re-Education Program, outlined a plan that fused logistics, psychology, and engineering. Every humane act would become a lesson in American capability. Every meal, a test of discipline. Quartermaster files show that the Army requisitioned mobile refrigeration units originally, designed for Pacific Island hospitals, and reconfigured them to cool prisoner rations deep inside Texas. Technical Bulletin 5520 described these as ice plants on wheels, each capable of producing 300 gallons of frozen dessert daily. Their presence in camps like Bowie and Hearne was less about comfort than about demonstrating industrial reach. If the U.S. could freeze milk in a desert, it could outproduce the Reich anywhere on Earth. The plan extended beyond machinery. Circular 21 of the Provost Marshal General's Office standardized menus, banning ersatz substitutes common in Europe. The order stated plainly, Rations for enemy prisoners shall equal depot troops. Psychologists from the Army Information and Education Division advised commanders to use abundance as ideological shock. According to internal notes by Lieutenant Colonel C.C. Eddy, Camp Herne, Aug. 1944, Germans marvel most at ice cream and movies. Disbelief leads to curiosity, then respect. That principle mirrored wartime. Intelligence assessments suggesting that cognitive dissonance was more effective than punishment in undermining totalitarian belief. Cultural exposure formed the second tier. Camps circulated newspapers in German, screened Hollywood films, and played swing records over loudspeakers. The War Department called this psychological disarmament. For many prisoners, the result was bewildering. Interrogation transcripts, RG 389, Box 1274, record one man asking, "Is this liberty or deception?" The question itself was success, the first crack in ideological certainty. Meanwhile, American factories reinforced the illusion of effortless generosity. Dairy plants in Fort Worth delivered 10-ton shipments weekly. Supply logs show less than 1% spoilage, despite the heat. At the center of this efficiency stood an unspoken message. Only a confident democracy could treat its enemies like guests and still win. By Christmas 1944, the system had evolved into a quiet propaganda machine. Beneath the Texas sun, engines hummed, freezers churned, and the war for hearts unfolded spoon by spoon. Declassified War Department evaluations later summarized the outcome with bureaucratic brevity. Morale effect favorable. In reality, it was transformative. Against every expectation of vengeance, America's weapon was proof that civilization, not cruelty, marked true victory. By July 1944, the Texas heat had become legend. NOAA climate records from the Coryell County Station logged 23 consecutive days above 105 degrees, the highest stretch since 1909. Inside Camp Bowie's perimeter, that heat forged the next stage of America's quiet experiment. Gardens tended by German prisoners sprawled over 125 acres, producing beans, tomatoes, and onions, later bartered with local dairies for cream. Quartermaster shipping manifests from Fort Worth Depot No. 2 list refrigerated convoys every Wednesday, 10-ton payloads of milk, eggs, and butter bound for Bowie's ice plant. Each arrival reinforced the miracle of supply, diesel generators thumping in the glare, guards wiping sweat while compressors held at 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Letters intercepted by sensors, RG 389, Box 1274, carried disbelief homeward. One sergeant wrote, "Mother, they give us ice that one eats. We live better than in Germany." The sentence joined dozens preserved in the Provost Marshal General's morale file, where analysts underlined phrases such as ice and butter. These were evidence that the psychological offensive was working. The prisoners' environment now mirrored American order: clean latrines, scheduled work, steady meals, and every comfort widened the gap between memory and propaganda. Operationally, the timing was deliberate. Circular 104 instructed camp commandants to stage morale-boosting events during periods of climatic hardship. Heat was no excuse. It was a theater. At Bowie, the canteen hour expanded to include chilled desserts served from steel drums. Witness statements in the Texas Historical Commission archive describe German cooks in spotless aprons, ladling portions while a U.S. sergeant counted spoons. No guard raised a weapon. The message was control through confidence. Beyond the wire, townspeople watched trucks bearing white stars pass under the shimmer of asphalt. The paradox amused them. America's enemies, sweating in uniform, fed from the same dairies as their children. Inside, the Germans still sang old marching songs, yet their harmonies faltered after each cold mouthful. The contrast between imagined cruelty and experienced abundance became unbearable precision. It was logistics as persuasion, refrigeration as rhetoric. By mid-July, the experiment stood poised for revelation. Temperatures would crest again, the ice would hold. And the proof of democratic power would taste of sugar, cream, and discipline, a lesson frozen in the record books of an improbable summer. The morning of July 18th, 1944 began under a merciless sky the color of brass. The thermometer outside the Camp Bowie headquarters read 110 degrees by noon, and the air carried the metallic taste of dust and diesel. At 600 hours, 3,000 German prisoners assembled for roll call, boots clicking in unison on the baked ground. Inside the mess hall, 18 American cooks and 40 German orderlies moved with mechanical precision under the supervision of Lieutenant Ray D. Thompson, preparing what Quartermaster Circular 21 designated Special Menu Number 7. The document survives in the camp's surviving ration ledger: roast beef, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, white bread, coffee, and, most improbable of all, vanilla ice cream for dessert. The ice cream was stored in galvanized barrels within a mobile refrigeration trailer humming behind the kitchen. Each barrel held 40 gallons of frozen mix trucked from Fort Worth the day before, its surface glistening like polished marble. Sergeant Andrew Malloy, overseeing distribution, later wrote in his log, "Prisoners amazed at frozen dessert. Discipline excellent." The notation appears brief, yet behind those words stretched the collapse of an entire ideology. Eyewitness recollections confirm the same astonishment. Arthur L. Smith recorded in interview number 42 of the Camp Bowie Oral History Project, a prisoner recalling, "We thought it was salt. When it touched our tongues, cold and sweet, we laughed like children." Another said simply, "I realized the war was lost when I tasted American milk." Even guards remembered the sudden quiet that followed the laughter, a stillness more powerful than any speech. Behavioral reports for August show measurable effects. Fights inside barracks fell by 1/3, absenteeism from labor details by almost half. The Provost Marshal General's evaluation classified morale as markedly improved. Within weeks, the camp newspaper, Der Ruf, reprinted translated articles about American farming efficiency, a subject once dismissed as propaganda. The change radiated outward. In interrogation huts, newly cooperative prisoners discussed production quotas, not politics. Temperature data for that day recorded a peak of 112 degrees, one of the hottest afternoons of the decade. The ice held firm. So did the system that produced it. Compressors thrumming, guards wiping sweat, Germans eating in silence. Nothing in the scene resembled victory or defeat, yet history later identified it as both. The event required no weapon, no surrender, only the controlled generosity of a confident nation. By sundown, the barrels were empty, the prisoners resting, and the guards preparing another shipment order. Official reports filed to Washington summarized the outcome with bureaucratic understatement: morale stabilization achieved through provision of special dessert. In the long accounting of wars, that line stands as one of America's quiet triumphs. The day a frozen ration in a Texas furnace demonstrated that power could rule through decency and that ice cream could, indeed, melt an empire's pride. In the weeks following that blistering July afternoon, something intangible fractured inside the fences of Texas. The National Socialist committees that had once ruled the barracks with whispered threats began to dissolve. Interrogation transcripts preserved in RG 389 Box 1279 note that by early September, organized ideology has disintegrated. Men uninterested in political discussion. Guards who once feared secret salute circles now watched prisoners queue quietly for baseball games, their armbands forgotten. An army psychologist summarized the shift. Ideology cannot breathe in air conditioned by abundance. Captured letters intercepted that autumn echoed disbelief. One read, "They feed us ice and show us films. Perhaps they mean it." Another simply asked, "Can an enemy be good?" Camp newspapers printed lessons in English grammar beside photos of model farms. The contrast with Germany was unbearable. From the other side of the Atlantic, Allied intelligence reports describe civilians scraping together 1,200 calories a day under rationing, while the same soldiers who had once sworn loyalty to Hitler now consumed over 3,800 in Texas. The dissonance became its own interrogation technique. Morale summaries show discipline holding firm without coercion. Escapes dropped to statistical zero by November 1944. Prisoner work units picked cotton, harvested peanuts, and returned voluntarily after shifts. In one recorded exchange, a guard joked about escape. The German replied, "Why run from a refrigerator?" Laughter followed, a kind unknown on battlefields. For army administrators, the phenomenon validated their experiment. A confidential Provost Marshal General memorandum filed in December declared, "Psychological capitulation achieved through consistent application of Geneva standards." The War Department's Intelligence Review of 1946 later concluded that ex-POWs from American camps showed highest index of democratic orientation among all repatriated prisoners. Beneath the barbed wire and watchtowers, the instruments of collapse were not rifles, but refrigerators, canteens, and quiet fairness. Pride thawed slowly, like ice in the Texas sun, replaced by respect that outlasted the war. In the minds of thousands of former enemies, victory no longer belonged to the Reich's banners, but to the invisible system that could feed its captives better than Germany fed its sons. When surrender finally came in 1945, many already believed the proof had been served months earlier, in a bowl of melting vanilla under an unforgiving American sky. When military planners reviewed the program at the end of 1944, the data confirmed what observation had already suggested. Humanity had become strategy. The Provost Marshal General's summary for December recorded a 15% reduction in guard requirements wherever recreational privileges were maintained. Camps with sports, education, and desert service needed fewer sentries, fewer punishments, and generated fewer reports of unrest. The system's efficiency was measured not in prisoners contained, but in discipline voluntarily maintained. Economically, the benefits reached far beyond the wire. Under agreements with the War Food Administration, German POWs filled the vacuum left by American labor shortages. Agricultural extension reports from Texas A&M estimated over 20 million pounds of cotton, peanuts, and vegetables harvested by prisoners in 1945 alone. The Texas Historical Commission archives preserve photographs of men in straw hats, cutting hay beside local farmers, the barbed wire only symbolic. Payment, 50 cents a day credited to camp canteens, flowed back into local economies through purchases of soap, tobacco, and Coca-Cola. Public perception evolved almost as quickly. Newspapers that had once decried coddling Nazis began publishing human interest stories. The Brownwood Bulletin of August 9, 1944 described polite prisoners helping harvest under scorching sun. Editorials reframed generosity as proof of moral victory. When community leaders visited the camps, they encountered discipline and courtesy rather than menace. The difference became its own domestic propaganda. The United States could win wars without abandoning conscience. Strategically, Washington saw psychological dividends. Intelligence analysts in 1946 concluded that repatriated prisoners from U.S. camps displayed the highest degree of cooperative disposition and democratic sympathy among Axis returnees. These men became informal messengers of American order inside occupied Germany, recounting movies, fair pay, and the impossible taste of ice cream under guard. What had begun as compliance with the Geneva Convention matured into one of history's quietest propaganda victories. When the last trains departed the Texas camps in 1946, townspeople lined the tracks to wave farewell. The departing prisoners left behind no ruins, only vegetable rows and memories. The ice plants shut down, but their hum echoed in the moral machinery of post-war reconstruction, a soundproof testament that decency, efficiently organized, could serve as both policy and power. When the camps closed in 1946, their legacy extended far beyond the fences left standing in Texas dust. Military historians now view the prisoner program as the largest controlled experiment in wartime humanitarianism. Between 1943 and 1946, more than 425,000 Axis soldiers, 372,000 of them German, had lived under American custody. The experience reshaped both the captors' doctrine and the captives' beliefs. Within a year, the lessons of Texas were written into policy. The 1947 U.S. Army Field Manual 27-10, the definitive guide on the treatment of prisoners, codified the same Geneva standards that had governed Bowie and Hearn. Humane control had become official military science. Academic analysis soon followed. Scholars such as Arnold Kramer and Arthur L. Smith, Jr. demonstrated that post-war Germany's democratic orientation owed much to men who had once eaten American rations behind barbed wire. Surveys conducted by the U.S. Office of Military Government in 1948 measured political attitudes among returnees and found that former POWs from the United States registered the highest trust in democratic institutions of any cohort. Their memories of organization, fairness, and even the peculiar abundance of ice cream became evidence that authority could coexist with liberty. The program's success also altered the psychology of occupation. Declassified Education Division. Memoranda show that repatriated officers were deliberately placed in early administrative roles in Bavaria and Hesse because their understanding of American order reduces friction. Cultural. Bridges once unimaginable were quietly being built by men who had once sworn to destroy them. In Texas, the remnants of those camps turned into shrines of reconciliation. At Camp Hearn, visitors' books from the 1980s contain entries written in careful German cursive. I learned freedom from ice cream. Former guards attended reunions with ex-prisoners, sharing photographs, recipes, and laughter under the same sun that had once baked the wire. Museums rose from former stockades, preserving canteens, typewriters, and a dented stainless steel ladle that had once served the famous dessert. Strategically, the experiment established a template for Cold War psychological operations and future peacekeeping standards. Its message was simple: moral authority, when enforced with logistical precision, could disarm more effectively than fear. The Texas camps had turned compassion into doctrine. The ice that refused to melt in 110-degree heat became an enduring metaphor for America's resilience, hard, pure, and powered by faith in its own ideals. Long after the prisoners returned home, that faith continued to shape how the United States fought, rebuilt and remembered its wars. By the war's end, the United States had achieved something few nations in conflict ever had: victory without vengeance. The POW camps scattered across the plains of Texas, Kansas, and the Carolinas stood as proof that power did not require cruelty to command respect. The 1946 War Department Final Report on Prisoner of War Operations summarized the achievement with bureaucratic calm: no systemic mistreatment recorded, discipline sustained through consistency. Behind that understatement lay millions of meals, thousands of letters home, and one unspoken argument for civilization itself. For the German prisoners who returned across the Atlantic, memory blurred the wire but not the taste. Many later recalled that the moment they understood democracy was not in speeches or textbooks, but in the clatter of mess tins and the cold shock of ice cream against a Texas noon. A former corporal interviewed in Bremen in 1950 said simply, "They conquered us with refrigerators." The remark, verified in post-war German oral histories, captured the essence of a campaign that replaced fear with curiosity and hostility with imitation. For the American officers who had enforced the Geneva rules, the lesson endured. Field Manual 27-10, issued the following year, distilled their experience into doctrine. Humanity, precisely administered, sustains discipline more effectively than violence. From Vietnam to Iraq, every subsequent generation of American soldiers has trained under that standard. descended directly from those desert camps where decency became logistics. Today, the faint concrete outlines of Camp Bowie still cut across the Texas grasslands. Visitors find no statues, only fragments of foundations and the memory of an idea proven true. Brigadier General Archer Lurch's final memorandum closed the program with the line, "We fought tyranny by proving civilization could feed even its foes." His words remain the final verdict. Strength is not measured by destruction but by control. In the end, America's greatest weapon in World War II was not the bomb or the bullet. It was the conviction that mercy, efficiently organized, could defeat hate.